Welcome back. So we are going to start laying the foundation for the floor. Typically a shed would be raised up on timber bearers, and generally that's a bad idea because you don't want wood in direct contact with the soil where it's going to be getting wet, because over time, once that wood treatment wears away, which it always does, your wood is going to rot. And I could see this when I lifted up my old shed. They were on tiny little bearers and it literally was just breaking apart in my hands. So ideally you want to have the shed raised up on something to get it off of the water that will be sitting on this concrete base when it rains. There are a few options. You can get plastic. They use recycled plastic bearers. You can also use steel. And what is more commonly used is some sort of brickwork. You can just lay engineering bricks, or you can use something like this, which is a lintel. And this is what you'd usually put on the top over the span of a window just to hold the brickwork up. These are reinforced, so they can definitely hold a lot of weight. I made a mistake and I should have ordered ones that were longer, because it would have meant that I would have had less of them to lay. Mixing the mortar by hand, I quickly realised this was going to be quite an annoying job. So I got a little mixer attachment for my SDS drill. You can just see it there where I'm mixing, and it made this much easier. Now you can see here that I'm actually using some steel shims to raise up these lintels. Basically, I had a 40mm deviation between the diagonal points of this area of concrete base. So I had to make up that. Now, I made my second mistake, and that was when I was laying the first lintel brick. I was laying that at the highest point because I knew that obviously every other brick laid would have to reach that level. Unfortunately, I raised that lintel about an inch from the corner of the concrete base, and really I should have just set it on the concrete base directly and worked off of that, because what ended up happening is I basically added an inch to all of the other bricks that had to be raised up. But using some string line and my laser level, which really did come in handy, when the sun sets, gets a little bit darker, you can easily pick up that green laser. That really did help me get everything nice and straight and level. So after months and months of planning, I could finally order my timber. I had to move it twice. I had to first of all move it into my living room because it started raining as soon as the timber arrived. And then when it stopped raining, I managed to get it outside and under some tarpaulin sheets. So this was quite a lot to move in one day, especially having to do it twice. Luckily, my partner Lakshmi, she gave me a little helping hand at the end. Now this timber here, what you're seeing, I think it was about £1,400. Quite expensive, and I've actually had to order some more timber because I ended up doing the roof wrong, and I'll explain that in a future video. But this is C24 timber. I've got 3 meter lengths and 3.6 meter lengths, and this is basically what I'm going to be using to build the floor, the walls, and also the roof. But yeah, I made a mistake in using it for the roof. I'm using 18mm OSB 3 for the walls, the inner and outer sheathing, and also I'm using just softwood plywood for the floor. Again, that's just 18mm plywood. Now the fun begins and I can start building this thing. So basically I'm just doubling up my floor joists. I wanted a really nice secure floor because I'm going to be putting maybe some heavy machinery on this in the future. You know, things that could be weighing up to a ton. These are going to be spanned just your regular 400mm on the centers. And basically I'm just going to build this in 2 parts. And I'm really glad that I did split up the floor, because when you're picking these up just like 3 or 4 at a time, they don't really seem that heavy. But once you're putting it all together and it's, 2.5 meters or God forbid it was 5 meters in width, this thing would have been very difficult to pick up and move. So I'm doubling them up with some wood screws, and then I am drilling holes every single about 70 centimeters spacing. And these are going to be M12 coach bolts that are going to be threaded through and bolted through using square washers on the other side. I'm using some 6mm Spax screws here. Honestly, I wasn't actually too impressed with these Spax screws. I have used Spax in the past, and they are usually very good. But for some reason, these just weren't biting into the wood. But you can see how I put this together. This is very simple. Framing in general is a very easy thing to do. All you need to do is make sure that you got your measurements right. You can't really go wrong. Now I'm just measuring the corner to corner dimensions and making sure that they are the same. And if they're not, you can just hit one of the corners and just budge it up a little bit and you'll get there in the end. It's pretty easy to do. Next, I'm going to be adding some reinforcement into the concrete base, and this is going to accommodate some metal strapping that will hold down this floor to the concrete base. Honestly, it's probably not really needed because this shed is going to have so much weight on it and inside of it, it's not going to blow away. But it's good practice. I've seen many people just advise to do it when they are building these sort of structures. So I thought I'd give it a go because it's just a learning experience. And here's a very important step. I've added a damp-proof course in between the concrete lintel and the timber frame. And this will stop any moisture moving up through those concrete bricks and into the timber, which will lead to rot. Next, I'm just putting in some battens that I will be using to hold up the insulation for the flooring. For insulation, I'm using 75mm PIR, and this is Kingspan, but you can get any brand. They're all pretty much the same. Just get whatever is the cheapest in your local area. Now, I made sure that the spacing in between my joists was 400mm, and the reason I did that is that these sheets of foam, they come in whips of 1200. So you can split it into 3 and it helps to avoid any waste. You can see in the middle here, I've actually had to space out the joists differently because they wouldn't sit on the lintels that I installed for that concrete foundation. Any gaps left over, I made sure to fill with expanding foam. There are 2 ways to install PIR foam into these joists, and that is that you can either do a press fit and get it obviously cut right to the size of the spacing, or you can leave a gap around the foam so that you've got enough space to get in the nozzle for that expanded foam. And I think actually leaving a gap would have been easier. It's actually quite difficult to push in the nozzle. But once you let it all cure, you can just scrape off any excess that has risen up. And now I am sealing any gaps with some aluminium foil tape here. The foil backing on the foam also might have some holes in it, and you can also use the aluminium tape to fill up any of those holes. Basically, you just want to make this as airtight as possible because this is kind of going to be acting like a vapor barrier for the floor. The flooring insulation is complete, so now I can go ahead and add my plywood flooring. So I'm going to be using softwood plywood, and I probably would have rather have used maybe some sort of water resistant plywood, but honestly it is so much more expensive. I'm making sure that the edges of each plywood sheet, they are sitting on a joist, and I'm also using some grip fill adhesive on the joist just to hold it in place and just to try and make sure that there isn't any squeaking. Now you might notice that part of the floor isn't actually going to be supported by any joist. I think this probably won't be a problem. I mean, I've stood in it and it doesn't seem to be any bounce, but people have said that, you know, using maybe tongue and groove flooring would be better because then it is obviously supported on all edges. And this is something that maybe I should have done, but again, it is more expensive than just this regular 18mm plywood that I've bought. So I was trying to do this on as much as a budget, but I think in the future, if I was going to do it again, I probably would have just got some sort of tongue and groove. Last step is to seal any of the plywood edges and any of the end grain of the floor joists just with some water resistant sealer here. That is the floor finished. Next, we can start to frame the walls. Feel free to ask any questions as usual. Happy to answer and help anyone that is maybe planning a similar build like this. That's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all later.